So although my first visit back to the old estate lake had resulted in a few nice double figure common carp, it had also given me a few things to think about, in particular in terms of line lay and rig efficiency. So I decided to implement some changes, and the first thing I changed, which might seem a little strange, was the bait. And I went for trimmed down boilies and pellets. Now this isn't because there's anything inherently wrong with sweet corn. It's just when baiting up with sweet corn, it's very difficult to put any real distance between the grains, and as a result the carp were tending to sit on a spot with their mouths sort of stuck to the lake bed, which was giving them time to either fill the line or rig, and there seemed to be a couple of occasions where they got away with it. So I thought by moving to denser baits that I could introduce these singly and spread them out over a wider area to keep the fish moving between baits, hopefully create some competitive feeding, and when the fish did pick up the hook bait, hopefully they'd still be moving and pull the rig against the lead and end up hooked. The first time out it seemed to work pretty well, as it didn't take very long for this bait to be picked up. Still not entirely comfortable with how I'm fishing, because I'm still feel like I'm playing a numbers game. Despite spending a fair amount of time looking, I'm having an awful lot of trouble with tracking down my target fish. Every time I see a dark fish, it could be it, but I can't. I've got 0 confirmed sightings so far, since the one way back before I stopped fishing in the beginning of the summer. So I am just running through the numbers. It's a little bit frustrating, but last time, just as I was leaving, I actually saw another fish that I hadn't seen before, so that one's become a bit of a secondary target. So first I had to deal with this lovely estate lake common, not particularly big, but it showed that my thinking was going in the right way. And now back to the mystery mirror that I'd seen. So there's another area in the lake that's heavily weeded, and there's a resident mirror carp there that I've caught, and I thought I was watching that one day whilst leaving the lake, and it was then joined by a second mirror that I didn't recognise. So I realised that there's a backup target, if you will, and I spent a bit of time watching them, and they were doing a lap over the top of the weed, underneath the weed, and then along a clear channel in front of the weed. I'd introduced a bit of bait whilst they were out under the weed, and I was waiting for them to come around, and again still with the boilies and the pellets, so I can spread the bait out and try and create almost it's like a roadway to the hook bait really. And after some time of waiting, both of them came into the swim, but they weren't feeding together. I had seen them feeding quite well together, but this time they were slightly apart, going slightly different ways. And I was fixated on the one that I thought was the mystery mirror, but unfortunately just at the moment that it was too late to react, I realised that the one that had approached the hook bait was actually the one I'd caught previously, so this was a recapture. Little bit disappointing. It's a lovely fish and it looks lovely in its autumn colours, but it would have been nice to avoided catching this one, because not only had I killed the swim for the day, but I've now upset this fish. It was working quite well with the other one and creating a competitive feeding situation. So having caught a couple of fish, I called it a day and went home to think about things further. But I was back a couple of days later. Conditions were a lot more overcast, and once again I spent some time walking around the lake trying to find this dark scaled mirror, the fish that's brought me back. Once again failing miserably, seeing 3 or 4 possibles but no definites. So I set up in the shallows, as I have been doing. There's a number of carp seem to visit this area at the moment, and again this is something I've also been working on, having seen them spook off the main line. I'm trying to cast just slightly past clumps of weed, and I almost want the lead and the lead clip to be on the front of that little bit of weed, and then the slack line, the main line, just hanging slack through it or over it, because slack lining in the open water, although we think it's all pinned down nicely on the bottom, I think actually it's sort of curled up through mid-water like a steel hawser. But again, this change to pellets and boilies seems to be keeping the carp moving and creating a slightly more competitive feeding situation. And it's always going to be the fastest carp that gets to your bait first. And just as I was adjusting the camera, I saw a big swirl over the hook bait, and it was fish on. Now I do have to apologise, because at the moment this reel sounds like a bag of nails and it's not. Somewhere along the line I've lost the nut that forms the lever for the ratchet system. Now I put it somewhere safe. It came unscrewed, and I put it somewhere safe, and for the life of me I can't find it anywhere. And rather than take the internal part of the ratchet system out and put that somewhere safe and lose it, I've just left it rolling around in the back of the spool. It doesn't affect the performance, but it does make it sound terrible. So I really need to get around to sorting that. But I could tell as this fish got closer, I recognised it. It's a common that's been up in this area on a few of my visits. It's quite distinctive in that it's got a light patch on its gill cover, almost like a square, about halfway up the gill plate, an old scar of some sort, and a good chunky fish, one of the darker commons, which is always nice. So that had put paid to that spot for a little while at least, because most of my sessions are only 3 hours, maybe 4 hours long, so I never have much time, and autumn's pushing on and I need to make the most of it. So it was back down to the other end, and the mystery mirror was out and about, and you can see how similar it looks to the recaptured mirror. In the water they look very, very similar, and it's only when they're next to each other you can really tell them apart. This one has more scales on its lateral line, but now it's feeding all alone, which makes it a far trickier proposition. I have seen it joined by a small common, but that doesn't seem to hang around for very long. So now this fish is feeding with no pressure and all the time in the world to look for main line and rigs and anything else. So I laid a trap, and you might be able to make out just that slight dark patch, which is a small patch of weed on the bottom, and again trying to get the leg clip tight against that, the line sort of disguised within it, and then just a hook bait on the clear spot. And sure enough, as the fish did its lap, it came round and slowly worked its way towards the rig and spooked off it. So all my efforts and all my planning went up in a cloud of smoke, or to be more precise, a cloud of silt. But I'll go away, I'll have a think about it, and I'll be back again. You can rest assured of that.